They came for my American flag. Not with a friendly knock or a polite request, but with threatening letters, fines, and relentless rules that seemed designed to break me. The HOA claimed it violated some obscure regulation, but anyone could see it was just another excuse for control. I thought I was ready to fight, until the notices escalated, the neighbors whispered, and the threat became real. And then, my grandfather, a retired military man, showed up. But no one expected what he brought with him. A tank. Would one old veteran be enough to stand up to an entire HOA? Or had I just unleashed something far bigger than any of us imagined? Life in Oak Ridge Estates had always felt safe, predictable, and just a little too perfect. Tree-lined streets curved gently around neatly kept lawns, children rode bikes in the evenings, and neighbors waved from their porches. I loved this community, not for its conformity, but for its quiet charm. My grandfather and I had moved into our modest two-story home just a year ago, drawn by the sense of history in the neighborhood, the well-tended gardens, and the promise of a peaceful life. Our home had a small front yard, perfect for my pride and joy, the American flag my grandfather had carried decades ago in his military service. It wasn't just cloth on a pole. It was a symbol of everything he had fought for, a piece of family history that had survived generations. I had placed it proudly at the corner of the porch, imagining it fluttering freely in every breeze. At first, Oak Ridge felt welcoming. Neighbors waved, kids laughed on the sidewalks, and weekend barbecues filled the air with the scent of grilled burgers and homemade pies. Yet beneath the polished lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges, the HOA lurked like a shadow. They had rules for everything: hedge heights, mailbox colors, even the types of welcome mats allowed. Most residents ignored them, quietly bending the rules. But there was one neighbor, always watching, always ready to report any perceived infraction, who seemed to relish enforcement. I barely noticed at first, busy with work and family. But a letter arrived in the mail one crisp morning, stamped with the HOA's seal. Its tone was polite but unmistakably firm. My flag supposedly violated community aesthetics. My heart sank. I had grown up respecting rules, but this felt different. It wasn't about safety or fairness. It was about control. As I held the letter in my hands, I didn't yet understand the storm it would unleash. The neighbor who reported me, the relentless HOA fines, the endless paperwork, they were all just the opening act. And I certainly had no idea that my grandfather, the quiet man who spent his days tending his roses and telling stories of long-ago battles, would soon turn this suburban skirmish into something no one could ignore. At first, I tried to reason with the HOA. I wrote emails, called board members, even asked politely if I could explain why the flag mattered. Each response was cold, bureaucratic, and carefully worded to avoid admitting wrongdoing. "We appreciate your concern," one letter began, "but community standards must be upheld." My heart sank with every form letter I received, each one stacking like bricks on my chest. What had started as a small complaint now felt like an inescapable pressure. Then the fines began. Small at first, $25 for unauthorized display of nonconforming materials. I paid them, thinking it would be over quickly. But the letters kept coming, each escalating $50, $75, $100. And the language grew sharper. Continued violation may result in additional action. One notice warned, as if my pride and family history were crimes. I looked at my grandfather's flag and wondered if standing for it was worth this fight. But giving up was never an option. I refused to take the flag down. Each morning, as sunlight touched the edges of the stars and stripes, I felt the quiet strength it carried. I imagined my grandfather, decades ago, standing in foreign lands with courage far beyond what I'd ever known. If he could face enemies on distant battlefields, surely I could face a group of petty bureaucrats. Still, the HOA didn't relent. They sent inspectors who measured the flagpole, inspected the yard, and even questioned my neighbors. Whispers started spreading. "Did you see the flag at the Johnsons'? They're going to be fined." One neighbor, usually friendly, glanced at me suspiciously as though I had committed a crime. The community that once felt welcoming was now suffocating. Every glance, every nod, every smile was tinged with judgment. I felt alone, like I was fighting a war with no allies. The harassment escalated further. Notices appeared on the door, left on the porch, slipped under my mailbox. Some were polite enough to pretend they were suggestions. Others were threats thinly veiled as warnings. One particularly aggressive letter accused me of undermining community harmony and exerting influence contrary to HOA principles. I read it over and over. Incredulous. All I had done was display a flag. How had something so simple become a declaration of war? Even the neighbors started taking sides. A few whispered encouragement from behind closed doors, but most avoided me entirely. Children I had waved to in the mornings now ran past, quickening their pace, as though proximity to my house might somehow taint them. It was lonely, and yet, strangely, empowering. Every unfair notice, every snide glance, strengthened my resolve. I wouldn't bow to arbitrary rules. Not for money. Not for fear. Then came the meeting notice. A formal request for a hearing in front of the entire HOA board. I knew this would be the stage for the next battle. The letter detailed the violation and invited me to explain myself, but the tone left no doubt this was a setup, a chance for the board to publicly assert their dominance and humiliate anyone who defied them. I felt the weight of anticipation pressing on my chest. My grandfather, who had been quietly observing the situation, simply shook his head and muttered, "Let them come." The days leading up to the hearing were tense. I discovered new rules I hadn't known existed, guidelines on flag sizes, pole placement, even the angle at which the fabric could hang. Each rule seemed more absurd than the last, like a game designed to frustrate rather than govern. One night, while reading another letter demanding compliance or face penalties, I slammed my fist on the kitchen counter, the sound echoing through the empty house. I was angry, yes, but also determined. They had picked the wrong house. Neighbors began noticing the strain. The Johnsons' home, once cheerful and quiet, now had an air of defiance. I could see curious faces peering from blinds as inspectors arrived, clipboards in hand, measuring tape and cameras ready. It felt like a parade of scrutiny, each visit a reminder that I was being watched, judged, and targeted. The isolation was suffocating, yet the flag remained untouched, its colors vivid against the morning sky. But the HOA wasn't finished. They escalated further, threatening legal action, citing vague clauses from the community charter that even their own lawyers admitted were rarely enforced. They sent letters with deadlines, demands for removal, and hints of liens on property. It was relentless. Each day brought a new challenge, a new psychological battle designed to wear me down. I felt cornered, trapped in a war that seemed both petty and cruel. My grandfather noticed my frustration. He never spoke much, but he started spending more time outside, inspecting the yard, checking the flagpole, and quietly keeping watch. One evening, he said something that chilled me in its simplicity. "They think they can scare us with letters and rules. Let's see if they can handle what comes next." I had no idea what he meant, but the glint in his eye told me that the next chapter of this battle was going to be unlike anything Oak Ridge had ever seen. And then came the whispered rumors, HOA members speculating that I might finally remove the flag under pressure. Some neighbors warned me to choose my battles. Others laughed at my stubbornness. But every letter, every visit, every bureaucratic assault only deepened my resolve. I wasn't just defending a piece of cloth. I was defending history, honor, and the principle that no one, not even a faceless board of rules, could dictate what pride and patriotism looked like in my own home. As the hearing approached, tension reached a boiling point. The day of the meeting, I felt the electric anticipation that comes just before a storm. Oak Ridge was watching. The HOA was prepared. I wasn't alone. I had my grandfather, my history, and the quiet determination that comes from knowing the fight is right. But even I couldn't anticipate the spectacle that would unfold, the moment when civility and bureaucracy collided with something so unexpected, so jaw-dropping, that it would leave the entire neighborhood speechless. The stage was set. And at that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a flag anymore. It was about standing up to absurdity, about refusing to be bullied, and about showing a community that sometimes the simplest acts of pride are worth more than anyone could ever imagine. Little did anyone know, by the time the hearing began, the suburban battlefield had already changed. The rules, the letters, the fines, they were about to meet a force the HOA had never considered. A quiet, unassuming veteran was about to turn a neighborhood dispute into a showdown no one would forget. The morning of the HOA hearing arrived like a storm rolling in over Oak Ridge Estates. The streets were quiet, but the tension was electric. Every neighbor who had ever glanced at my flag or whispered about my stubbornness seemed to be holding their breath. I could feel their eyes, even from behind the closed blinds. I paced the living room with my grandfather, the flag fluttering behind us in the crisp autumn wind. He didn't say much. He never had to. But the set of his shoulders, the calm determination in his gaze, spoke volumes. This was going to be unlike any HOA confrontation the neighborhood had ever seen. When we arrived at the clubhouse, the air was thick with expectation. Board members sat stiffly behind a long oak table, their clipboards and legal pads ready, eyes sharp with judgment. The chairwoman, the same one who had signed countless letters demanding the flag's removal, fixed me with a look that could freeze fire. Around the room, neighbors fidgeted in folding chairs, some eager, some reluctant, all waiting for the inevitable spectacle. The first few moments were polite. Too polite, like the calm before a hurricane. The chairwoman opened with rehearsed words, citing community rules, aesthetic standards, and the importance of maintaining harmony. Her voice was smooth, but her eyes betrayed impatience. I listened, calmly nodding, feeling the weight of every absurd regulation she rattled off. Hedge heights, mailbox colors, welcome mat patterns, nothing about safety, nothing about reason, just power. Then came the accusation that hit hardest. My flag was disruptive to the community. Disruptive. I swallowed hard, gripping my grandfather's hand under the table. Disruptive was an insult. Disrespectful was one thing, but disruptive, that was a challenge I couldn't ignore. The board pressed on, reading aloud letters of complaint from neighbors I didn't even know existed. Each one painted me as an antagonist, a troublemaker, someone willing to stir division over a mere piece of fabric. I felt my blood boil, but I stayed silent, letting them speak, letting the absurdity of it sink in for everyone else in the room. Every word they read was a testament to pettiness cloaked in bureaucracy. Then came the threat that changed everything, a motion to fine me for every day the flag remained displayed, escalating to potential liens and legal action. One board member leaned forward, smug and triumphant, as if imagining my eventual surrender. I could see the other homeowners shifting in their seats, uncertain, some secretly hoping I would cave. But as I glanced at my grandfather, I realized something crucial: we weren't here to negotiate. We were here to make them reconsider. When the chairwoman asked for my response, I took a deep breath. I stood, steady and unshakable. I spoke slowly, letting each word land, painting the scene for them. My grandfather's service, the history behind that flag, the sacrifices etched into its folds. I reminded them that this was more than a decoration. It was a symbol of honor, courage, and resilience. As I spoke, a few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, the weight of their own complicity pressing on them. They had never considered that a flag could carry this much meaning. Just as the tension reached a breaking point, my grandfather leaned back, smiling faintly, and then the unmistakable rumble began. The ground vibrated beneath the clubhouse. The board members stiffened. Eyes darted toward the windows. Outside, in the driveway, gleamed the impossible: a real tank, painted in muted military green, engine growling like a predator waking from slumber. My grandfather, calm as ever, had driven it personally, right through the large gates of Oak Ridge Estates. The room fell silent. Every word, every regulation, every threat suddenly seemed inconsequential in the presence of sheer, undeniable force. The chairwoman's mouth dropped open. Board members whispered frantically, unsure how to proceed. The tank didn't move aggressively. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to shatter the illusion of control they had so carefully cultivated. I could feel the room shifting, the balance of power reversing. The petty rules, the letters, the fines, all of it was meaningless against the truth staring them in the face. No amount of bureaucracy could suppress history, honor, or a family's pride. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. This flag isn't just mine. It belongs to every person who has ever defended freedom. It isn't disruptive, it's a reminder. The room was quiet except for the low growl of the tank. A few neighbors nodded subtly, faces illuminated by understanding, by empathy. Others averted their eyes, caught between fear and realization. The chairwoman tried to regain control, insisting on procedure, insisting on fines, but her words were drowned out by the sheer audacity of what we had brought into the fight. Then, without breaking the calm, my grandfather spoke. His voice was soft, but carried the weight of decades of authority. We've followed the law. We've respected the rules. But intimidation will not win here. He gestured to the flag. This isn't just a piece of cloth. It's a legacy. And it will not be taken from us. His words were simple, but they landed like hammers. For the first time, I saw fear, not just in the chairwoman, but in every board member who had assumed control over my life with ink and paper. The tension exploded when a board member nervously suggested calling the police, a last-ditch attempt to regain authority. My grandfather's eyes didn't flinch. He leaned over, calmly stating the obvious: the tank was fully legal, registered, and driven responsibly on private property. The threat evaporated instantly. The room realized, almost collectively, that the power they had wielded with letters and fines meant nothing here. They had misjudged the depth of our resolve, the history behind the flag, and the presence of someone who would never back down. A few neighbors dared to speak, quietly expressing support. "It's just a flag," one muttered, more to themselves than to anyone else. The absurdity of the entire situation hit like a wave. The board members stammered, unsure how to proceed, their carefully crafted authority crumbling in real time. The room, once a chamber of control and intimidation, now felt like a stage for reckoning. Minutes passed that felt like hours. I stood beside my grandfather, staring at the flag, feeling the flutter of the wind, and the wind of change. Every fine, every rule, every petty letter had led to this moment. And in this charged silence, I realized that we weren't just defending a flag. We were defending dignity, the right to stand firm in the face of absurdity, and the principle that courage, even in a suburban neighborhood, could change the game entirely. Finally, the chairwoman, her composure shattered, cleared her throat and mumbled something about revisiting the rules. The words were meaningless, hollow. In that moment, she had lost. Not just the battle over the flag, but control of the narrative, the moral high ground, and the respect of the community she claimed to serve. I could see it in her eyes. She knew we had won. The tank didn't have to fire a single shot. The flag didn't have to come down. Victory was already ours. As we walked out of the clubhouse, neighbors approaching cautiously, some smiling, others stunned into silence, the message was clear: Oak Ridge Estates would never be the same. The tank had turned heads, but the flag had turned hearts. Every threat, every letter, every fine was now a testament to our persistence, a monument to standing firm in the face of ridiculous authority. And as we reached our driveway, the last lingering whispers of disbelief floating in the autumn air, I looked at my grandfather, the hero of this suburban war, and realized that some battles, no matter how small they seem on paper, carry the weight of history, pride, and the unshakable truth that courage can't be measured in letters or rules. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a quiet hum of engines and the flutter of the flag, we knew this fight was over. Or at least, the first chapter had ended. And deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if one tank and one flag could shake Oak Ridge Estates to its core, what other impossible battles might be waiting just beyond the horizon. The morning after the confrontation, Oak Ridge Estates felt different. The streets that had once been a quiet backdrop to daily routines now carried an almost electric sense of anticipation. Neighbors stepped cautiously into their yards, eyes darting toward my home, toward the flag, toward the driveway where the tank still sat, gleaming in the early sunlight. Even the usual hum of distant lawnmowers and barking dogs seemed subdued, as if the entire neighborhood collectively recognized that something extraordinary had happened the day before. Inside, my grandfather moved with his usual calm precision, checking the flag, adjusting its angle just slightly so that it caught the morning light perfectly. He never said much. He rarely needed to. But I could see the satisfaction in his posture, the quiet pride that comes from a mission accomplished. We had endured endless letters, fines, and whispered threats. We had faced a bureaucracy that thrived on control and intimidation. And yet, here we were, standing tall, unbroken, the flag still waving proudly above our home. Word spread quickly. By mid-morning, whispers had transformed into conversations. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact stopped by our driveway, curiosity mixing with admiration. Some hesitated at first, unsure if it was safe to speak. But the presence of the tank and the unwavering calm of my grandfather seemed to give permission. I didn't know. One neighbor admitted quietly, eyes wide. I didn't realize you were right all along. Another nodded, saying simply, it takes guts to stand up like that. The HOA board was slower to respond, but their reaction came with the weight of bureaucracy meeting reality. Letters were rescinded, fines quietly withdrawn, and meetings postponed indefinitely. Board members exchanged terse phone calls and hushed conferences behind closed doors, trying to find a way to regain authority, or at least save face. But the image of my grandfather and the tank had already been seared into everyone's memory. Attempts at intimidation no longer held sway. Power had shifted, quietly but unmistakably, back to the people the HOA had meant to control. In the days that followed, life in Oak Ridge returned to a semblance of normalcy, but nothing felt quite the same. The streets were still lined with trees and neatly trimmed hedges, but the sense of surveillance, the feeling that every move might be reported or fined, had lifted. Neighbors began waving again, cautiously at first, then with growing warmth. Children played freely in the streets without fear of reprisal. Even those who had once supported the HOA's petty enforcement quietly stopped, their compliance replaced by respect and perhaps a hint of awe. The flag remained. Every breeze seemed to carry with it a silent message: perseverance matters. Courage matters. Standing firm, even when the odds are absurd, can create change. I noticed neighbors pausing to look at it, not in judgment, but in reflection, perhaps thinking about their own small battles, their own moments when they had felt powerless. And in those moments, I realized that what had started as a simple act of pride, a flag waving from my front yard, had become something much larger. It had become a symbol, not just of my grandfather's service, but of the power of ordinary people refusing to be bullied. My grandfather, ever humble, never sought recognition. Yet his presence had made all the difference. The tank, though dramatic, had been a tool of assertion, a reminder that sometimes ordinary arguments need extraordinary demonstrations to be heard. But the real victory wasn't the spectacle, it was the moral reckoning it created. People had seen that rules and bureaucracy can be weaponized, but they had also seen that courage and integrity can counteract even the most absurd forms of power. In the weeks that followed, the HOA quietly changed its approach. Rather than continuing a pattern of fines and threats, they began to communicate with a little more respect, perhaps wary of challenging residents so publicly. I received fewer letters, and those that arrived carried a noticeably softer tone. Some board members even approached me, offering hesitant apologies, though their words felt more like concessions than genuine admission. The message, however, was clear: Oak Ridge Estates had learned a lesson. Authority without fairness is fragile, and public perception can be a stronger force than any regulation. Community dynamics shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. Neighbors who had once whispered complaints began engaging in open conversations about fairness, rights, and the importance of standing by one's principles. Some asked how we had maintained our resolve. Others simply stopped looking for ways to control every minor detail of their neighbors' lives. I realized that our struggle had sparked conversations that would ripple through the community for years, altering the culture of Oak Ridge Estates in ways that no HOA manual could dictate. Personally, the experience left a lasting mark. I felt a renewed sense of confidence in my ability to confront injustice, no matter how institutionalized or seemingly insurmountable. I learned that persistence, combined with integrity and strategic courage, can dismantle the most entrenched systems of control. More importantly, I understood the importance of legacy. The way my grandfather's quiet strength and years of experience had amplified the impact of my stand. Together, we had not just defended a flag, we had defended dignity, respect, and the principle that no one should be bullied for their beliefs or pride. The story spread beyond Oak Ridge. Social media posts, shared videos, and neighborhood forums amplified the events, painting a picture of the absurdity of bureaucratic overreach and the power of principled resistance. People commented, debated, and shared their own experiences, often relating to the struggle against petty rules and intrusive authorities. The flag had become more than a family symbol. It had become a rallying point for anyone who had ever felt silenced or powerless. Even the local press picked up on the story. Articles praised the calm, measured defiance of my grandfather and me, framing it as a lesson in standing up to authority while maintaining dignity. Interviews highlighted the absurdity of the rules, but also the emotional core, a family defending what they valued most in the face of relentless pressure. The narrative resonated far beyond our street, inspiring others to reconsider how they engaged with local governance and how they responded when confronted with unfair treatment. Over time, I noticed a subtle change in myself. Where there had once been hesitation, doubt, and occasional fear, there was now a clear sense of empowerment. I understood that standing up for what was right, even when surrounded by absurdity, was never wasted effort. Every fine ignored, every letter returned, every confrontation faced with calm and purpose reinforced a simple truth: courage begets respect, and integrity carries weight that bureaucracy cannot diminish. The HOA, having been publicly humbled, eventually issued a formal acknowledgement that no further action would be taken regarding my flag. It was a small gesture, but it represented closure, a recognition that the rules they had wielded as weapons were, in fact, flawed. The board shifted its focus, and while some lingering tensions remained, the fear and intimidation that had once dominated Oak Ridge estates were gone. Residents could live with a little more freedom, a little more dignity, and a renewed understanding that standing firm could change the rules of engagement entirely. Looking back, the battle over a single flag revealed a broader truth. Systems of power often rely on compliance, on fear, and on the quiet acceptance of authority. But when individuals choose to stand firmly, thoughtfully, and with integrity, even the most entrenched institutions can be challenged. The experience left an indelible mark not only on Oak Ridge estates, but on me personally. A lesson in resilience, strategy, and the quiet power of moral courage. And as I look out from my front yard now, the flag catching the wind, the tank safely parked behind the garage, I can't help but feel a quiet pride. We had faced absurdity, pettiness, and relentless intimidation, and emerged victorious. The story is no longer just about a flag or an HOA. It's about principle, family, and the courage to resist when conformity feels easier. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all is this: standing up for what you believe in doesn't require perfection, but it does demand persistence. It doesn't always need a spectacle, but sometimes, when the stakes are high and the opposition unyielding, a little audacity is necessary to remind everyone what real strength looks like. And so, Oak Ridge Estates learned a lesson they would never forget. The flag still flies, the story still resonates, and every passerby, every neighbor, and every resident now knows that courage, respect, and integrity are forces no amount of bureaucracy can overcome. As the sun sets behind the trees, casting long shadows across the quiet streets, I can't help but wonder, in a world full of arbitrary rules and small-minded control, how many more flags, literal or figurative, are waiting for someone brave enough to stand up.